Well, good morning, church. Welcome to the second in our series of Christianity for people who are not Christians. And today we're going to look at Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. I saw an interesting articles on the Forbes website recently, and it was entitled "The Top Earning Dead Celebrities of 2019." You would click on something like that, am I right? I mean, I did. On that list were names like Dr. Seuss, Marilyn Monroe, Whitney Houston, Prince, and John Lennon. All people whose estates are still earning money. But here were the top five, starting with the fifth down to the first. Bob Marley his estate earned $20 million last year. 2019. Arnold Palmer, his estate earned $30 million last year. Charles Schultz was number 3. His estate, $38 million. Elvis Presley, $39 million. And the number 1 was Michael Jackson, who earned $60 million. Now, beginning with Bob Marley, who died of cancer in 1981, but who had nearly 1 billion streaming songs in the United States alone. There's also the House of Marley products like headphones, speakers, turntables, and all of that added up to an annual income for 2019 of $20 million alone. We can do the same with the other dead celebrities. But I think you get my point. It's amazing how people who are long dead can continue to have influence, to be relevant, to be engaged even in new generations. But those names are nothing compared to the most influential life that has ever been lived, which of course we know who that most influential life was, and we call him Jesus. But if you had been a contemporary of Jesus, you would likely have never seen this coming. I mean, he was born in a small, obscure village of somewhat questionable reputation, the child of a peasant woman. He didn't go to what we would think of as high school or college. He never visited a large city except, early in his life. In fact, he never traveled more than 200 miles from the place where he was born. He never wrote a book. He never held public office. He was only 33 or so when the tide of public opinion turned against him, and his closest friends even abandoned him. He was then turned over to his enemies and was nailed to a wooden cross between 2 criminals. And while he was dying, his executioners gambled for his clothes, which was the only things he owned in all the world. After he died, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of an acquaintance. And yet, today, he is arguably the central figure of the entire human race. His life even marks our concept of time. We call this year 2020 AD, Latin for Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. Anything before that is called BC, as in before Christ. And even when people want to get super, politically correct and remove the Christian overtones and call this the Common Era, CE, or before that they call it the Before the Common Era, BCE, it's still the life of Jesus that marks the divide. So let's talk. As to his historicity, there's no doubt that he lived. No scholar, no matter where they stand on Christianity itself, denies the man Jesus existed in history. That the one that the Bible talks about, this Jesus the Bible talks about, is in fact a historical figure. You find him listed in the writings of Thales, who was a first century Greek writer. Pliny the Younger, a lawyer and an author in ancient Rome. The Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius, as well as the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. And of course, the most detailed record is found in the Bible. And that gives not one, but 4 independent eyewitness biographical accounts written by the men Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. More than a few historians have noted that Jesus is the most documented life in ancient history. Indeed, just in sheer historical evidence or information, historians tell us we have better evidence for Jesus than we have for the historians who wrote about him. Better than we have for any of the early Caesars, better than we have for, believe it or not, George Washington. So we know he existed. We also know a few other things for certain. We know that his teaching was of such a compelling nature that to this day, it's part of our cultural ethos. Whether it was memorable lines such as, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," or timeless stories like the prodigal son, no one has been more important, more influential, spiritually or culturally. We also know that miracles were attributed to him. Whether you buy into the possibility of miracles or not, people who witnessed his life said he did them. We know that after a public ministry, he was sentenced to death through a Jewish and then Roman legal process. We know that on the 3rd day after his crucifixion, after his execution, there was an empty tomb. And no one denies that. A stone was rolled away and the body was gone. Even the Romans guarding it owned that one. And we know his followers went running around the landscape saying that Jesus had risen from the dead, that they had seen him, that they had talked with him, that they had touched him. This wasn't just one disciple making this claim. It wasn't even just a handful of them. It was all of them. There are even records of groups numbering into the hundreds who claim to have witnessed the resurrected Jesus at the same time. After that first Easter, the Jesus movement then began to explode. By AD 100, there were estimated to be around 25,000 followers. But by 310, a couple of hundred years later, there were estimated to be some 20 million. And today, there are billions, and it's the world's largest religious faith. So it's no wonder that when it comes to Jesus, we have lots of questions that we want answered. In fact, a couple of years ago, a church did an informal survey of its attenders and asked them what their top questions were. And do you know what number 1 was? What their top question was about Jesus? It was what I want to talk about next. Just give it a guess. You have your idea in mind, talk to it with somebody who's watching this with you. Here it was. The number 1 question was, what did Jesus look like? Answer, no one knows. That was the most burning question that people had at that time. Do we even know what he looked like? Okay, I won't leave you hanging, but give me just a minute. A few years ago, just to set this up, a few years ago, Sam and I were on a trip to the East Coast with her 8th grade class. And it was wonderful. And in the midst of that trip, we visited Harvard University. And at that university, you will find this bronze sculpture. And if I'm able to do this technologically, hopefully a picture of it will show up here or someplace on the screen right about now. Let's just wait and see if that happens. Okay? Now let's assume it's there, because I don't know if I can put it there. I'm going to try to put this picture and a couple more as well. But it's by the artist Daniel Chester French. Interesting thing though, Mr. French had no idea what John Harvard looked like. Not a clue. No one had ever done a painting, and of course pictures had not been invented, photographs had not been invented, and so he didn't know what John Harvard looked like. And incidentally, nobody else did either. So he sort of made it up. He made up his own image, and no one argued with him about it. No one pointed out that it looked remarkably like a Harvard student who was a descendant from one of the early Harvard presidents. So there you go. A bronze sculpture of the not quite in the likeness of John Harvard, because nobody really knows what John Harvard looked like. They ought to put that on the plaque there with the bronze. Something like that. So now, to our direct question, do we even know what Jesus looked like? Well, the answer is yes and no. I mean, first the no part. The Bible never says, Jesus was 6'3", blonde hair, blue-eyed, chiseled, good looks, like we see in so many pictures, right? But here's the yes part. We do know that he wasn't 6'3". He did not have blonde hair or blue eyes or chiseled good looks. We do know that. And while there's not a single historical reference to the physical appearance of Jesus and nothing in the Bible that describes his looks, we do know that he was a Mediterranean Jew. Therefore, his skin would have been olive-colored, an olive darkness, to what you find in that region even to this day. This also means he didn't speak English, not even King James English. Sorry, he didn't speak in these and thous. His native tongue was Aramaic. Now, as a boy in rabbinical school, or in the early schooling, he probably learned some Hebrew and probably Greek because that was the common language of business and commerce. But when walking down the road with family or in casual conversation, and probably most of his teaching, it was all in Aramaic, because that was the common language of the people of a Mediterranean Jew. And being a Mediterranean Jew also means he wasn't overly tall. Probably well under 6 foot. And according to ancient prophecy surrounding the coming of the Messiah that Christians believe applies to Jesus, he wasn't physically impressive to look at. So our text for today, Isaiah chapter 53, verse 2, says, "He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him." Which is Isaiah's way of saying, he looked like your typical, ordinary, average Mediterranean Jewish man. So the idea that Jesus was tall, dark, and handsome is only accurate in that dark part. The earliest drawings that we had that were ever made of him, at least the earliest that still are in existence, dates to the 5th century. So 500 years or so later, 500 years or so later, and the original hangs in one of the most ancient Christian structures on earth, St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert of Egypt. It's called Christ Pantocrator, translated Christ Almighty. And it's the classic picture of Jesus that dominated ancient Christianity and continues to be displayed in many churches to this day. And through the wonders of technology, if I get this right, it looks something like this, wherever it is on the screen. And I have no idea where it's going to appear through the magic of iMovie, So there you have that picture. Now, just a couple of years ago, some forensic anthropologists attempted to recreate what Jesus might have actually looked like from skeletal remains of that area and that region from around that time period. And the image they came up with was not particularly flattering, but would fit the biblical prophecies as well as the distinguishing features of his actual ethnicity. And so, in Esquire magazine back in 2015, they came up with this picture that hopefully now will appear magically somewhere on the screen. I don't know where. I think here, but I'm not sure. Okay? But if you want to go all the way back, the earliest possible image we have, and it's hotly debated in terms of authenticity, but it's the famed Shroud of Turin. And that looks like this, somewhere on your screen. Sam says it will be there. I say it'll be there. We'll get that figured out later, all right? Now, the truth is, we don't know what he actually looked like, beyond being short, dark-skinned, and without any shot of being named in People's Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. So let's move on. Another really important question would be, what did Jesus say about himself? This is what we do know about him. This is what we do know. And it's the most important thing to know about him. And we know who he said he was. You can imagine the air around Jesus would have been electric. And mass miraculous feedings of thousands of people are happening, and healings from all kinds of diseases, and even people being raised from the dead. So then as now, people wanted to know who he was. And in no uncertain terms, Jesus told them. Let me read for you one of those recorded declarations, and it is very direct. And you'll find this in the Gospel of John in chapter 8, beginning with verse 48. Where the text says, John says, "The Jews answered and said to him, 'Do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?'" Those are both slurs on Jesus' character. Jesus answered, "I do not have a demon, but truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death." The Jews said to him, "Now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, the prophets also, and you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste of death. Surely you are not greater than our father Abraham, who died. The prophets died too. Whom do you make yourself out to be?" And Jesus answered, "Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad." So the Jews said to him, You are not yet 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham?" And Jesus said to them, and here's the important bit, "Truly, truly, I say to you." And when he says truly, truly, he's saying this is important. This is very important. If you're taking note, take them now. "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am." Notice what happens next. "Therefore, they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple." Now, who did Jesus say he was? This is extremely important to unpack. He referred to himself as "I am." Now, I'm going to write this up over here, and Sam's going to rotate the camera. He referred to himself as "I am." And he got quite a reaction from the people when he said this. Now, before Abraham was born, I am. And that was either really bad grammar or he was trying to say something very significant. It was significant. The background of "I am" is found in one of the most famous stories of the Bible. You probably know the story. It's the story of Moses before that burning bush. And the entire story of Moses is amazing, which is why almost every movie made on the Bible is either about Moses or it's about Jesus. And those words of Jesus are lifted right from the part of the story where God is speaking to Moses, and God is sending Moses back to Israel, or back to Egypt, to set his people free. And Moses is not really in on the deal. He doesn't really want to do this. And so Moses says, if I go back there, who am I going to say is the God who sent me? And this is the answer God gave to Moses. You'll find it in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. God said to Moses, "I am who I am. Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you." Now that "I am" phrase is considered the most holy word in existence because it is the very name of God. It was considered so holy that the Hebrew people would not even write it out completely. In fact, they would only write out the consonants, and then they would not even pronounce the consonants. But if we were to transliterate it into English, it looks like this. Just those four consonants. Scholars used to think that that four-letter word was pronounced Jehovah, which is, of course, nonsense for lots of reasons, not least of which is that there's no J sound in Hebrew, which makes it doubly interesting when you have an aberrant so-called Christian group claiming to be his witnesses who clearly don't even know how to pronounce his name. But I digress. Anyway, we know that the closest we can make of the actual name in light of the missing vowels is that it was pronounced Yahweh. And so you put the vowels right here and right here. Yahweh. The proper name of God. God said, my name is Yahweh. My name is I am. And now we know what got the Jews so upset, got the people so upset when Jesus said in John chapter 8, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. The people there, in that moment, knew exactly what Jesus meant when he said it. They understood him completely, clearly, and they picked up stones to beat the life out of him because this was nothing short of blasphemy unless it was true. Here, they said, is a mere man claiming to be God himself. But this mere man made that claim repeatedly. Let me give you just a taste of this. John chapter 10, verse 36. I am the Son of God. Chapter 14, verse 6. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. John chapter 14, verse 9. He who has seen me has seen the Father. Mark chapter 14, verse 61. Again, the high priest was questioning him and saying to him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am. Then he just leaves it to us to decide what to do with him. And we know what they decided to do with him all those years ago in Jerusalem. They killed him for this, stripped him, beat him, and nailed him to a cross for this, for claiming to be God. But what will you do? As I see it, he leaves you really only four options. And that's what I want to talk about next, these four options. First, maybe, and I'm going to start at the bottom, maybe he was a lunatic. Maybe he's just plain crazy. Maybe he's just a lunatic. Maybe he did think he was God. Maybe he was severely psychologically ill. It's at least a possibility. The problem is that in most cases of severe psychological disorder, the background of the person makes it very clear that they had a profile and a history of mental illness. But nothing in the historical record of the life of Jesus exhibits a single sign of the classic manifestations of mental illness, such as the inability to relate in the real world, or inadequacy in personal relationships, or deficiencies in verbal skills. In fact, psychiatrist J.T. Fisher concluded that if you were to survey all the psychological data that his disciples have to offer and boil it down to one essential and perfect prescription for mental health, it would be Jesus' words, the Sermon on the Mount, the most famous single message Jesus ever proclaimed. So he wasn't a lunatic. Maybe he was, if not a lunatic, maybe he was just a liar. Right? Maybe he was just a liar. Maybe he was just really good at not telling the truth. Jesus said he was God, but obviously he knew he wasn't, so he is just the world's greatest con man. Maybe. Certainly on the table. Certainly ought to be thought about. But this would be saying that the man whose teaching has set the standard for integrity and honesty throughout the civilized world was himself a habitual, premeditated, pathological liar. And that doesn't make a lick of sense. Even more important to remember is that Jesus was arrested, mocked, beaten, and tortured horrifically prior to his execution. Willingly before his execution. He submitted to it. Jesus was offered, you have to understand this, Jesus is offered a full pardon by the Roman governor Pilate if he would simply deny his claim to be God. Now listen, if a con man could stop a nail being driven into the flesh of his hand by telling the truth, you know that's what he would do. People who are playing the system for personal gain tend to change their game when it stops paying off for them. They keep up the lie until the deception costs them more than they gain through the deceit. But Jesus endured it all. He never denied his claim to be God, though given every opportunity to do just that. So that doesn't fit either. Lunatic, liar. No, maybe he was just a good man. Maybe even a prophet. Can you read that? I can hardly read that. Maybe he's just a good man. That's a third option. Not many people want to say that Jesus was a lunatic. And not many people want to say that Jesus was a liar. I mean, there really isn't any evidence of either, but they don't want to say that he was God in human flesh either. So they land on him being simply a good man, maybe even a holy man, maybe in even other religious faiths. Maybe he's also a prophet. But there's a problem with this option as well. C.S. Lewis once wrote about this. Lewis himself, a former atheist who argued his way from atheism into the Christian faith, Lewis went after it and exposed how intellectually dishonest this good man idea was. This is what he said. He said, I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on the level with the man who said he was a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great man, a human teacher, a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, and he did not intend to. Now, Lewis is right. Jesus claimed to be God in human form. And your choices really boil down to three. He is either liar or lunatic, or he's Lord. Those are really your only options. Liar, lunatic, or he's your Lord. And then he just gives it to us. Take your pick. And one more thing. Let's call it the final test. How can we know it's true? I mean, really know. If I told you that I was God in human form, that I came to planet Earth to show the way and call the world back to myself, you would have every right to say, prove it. People certainly said that to Jesus, and rumor has it, he did prove it through a stunning array of miracles. You know, from walking on water to raising the dead. Jesus silenced more than his fair share of skeptics, but he raised the stakes even further. He laid out one very specific proof for his claim. And he invited anyone and everyone to judge him by this one claim. And Christians believe he passed that ultimate litmus test. And honestly, the entire world is still talking about it. His big proof? Coming back from the dead. Well, we just celebrated a couple of weeks ago that we Christians celebrate every time we gather to worship. We might call it the Jonah test, because it's patterned after Jonah's 3-day vacation in the belly of the great fish. Jesus said, and he said it often, in fact, 3 times in Mark. For example, look at Mark chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10. He says it over and over again. He said, we're going to Jerusalem, and when we get there, they're going to kill me. They're going to deliver me up, and they're going to kill me. And 3 days later, I'm coming back. His disciples at the time had no clue what Jesus was talking about. Every time he said it, they changed the subject. Peter told them that was not possible, and Jesus said, you're acting like Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Right to his face. Jesus said it again, and the disciples just ignored it altogether. He said it a 3rd time, and James and John said, well, whatever. But when we get there to Jerusalem, how about you give the 2 of us the best seats in the new kingdom? They just didn't get it because it was so outside of the realm of possibility, so outside of their thinking, until he delivered word for word on what he said. He was put to death in Jerusalem. He was buried, and he came back. J. Warner Wallace was a decorated homicide investigator with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, and he was an avowed atheist. He became a founding member of the department's cold case homicide unit, assigned to crack murder cases that nobody else had been able to solve, even from years prior. And his ability to close these cases made him something of a legend. He once said, as a cop, if you believe everything people tell you, then you'd never arrest anyone. So for him, facts need to be solid. Witnesses have to be credible and vetted. Evidence must be persuasive. Corroboration is always crucial. And alibis have to be dismantled. And he's good. He's very good at what he does. Wallace has been awarded the Police and Fire Medal of Valor for sustained superiority in his work, and the Cops West Award for his ability to get to the truth and solve these kinds of crimes. He's so good at it that he's even been featured multiple times on Court TV and on NBC's Dateline, and in other news outlets as well. And when they needed expertise on what it takes to arrest killers who thought they had gotten away from their murder, he was the one they call in to solve the case that no one else can solve. Now, I want to give you about 56 seconds of an interview he gave on NBC, which will start right about now.
There's no statute of limitations on murder, and the ones that are unsolved go into a cold case file. In Torrance, California, those cases landed on the desk of Detective Jim Warner Wallace. Several cold cases that Jim solved were featured on NBC Dateline.
In the end, you're trying to figure out what just happened here, are constantly entering each scene and asking what really happened here using the evidence available to you. And because these are cases that really were given up for lost. They really, nobody had any expectations of ever solving those cases.
Jim started in law enforcement as a patrol officer. A second-generation cop, he wore his badge proudly. He had a keen eye and sharp mind, and by his 30s was promoted to detective.
Now, Wallace decided to take on the coldest case of all, and the coldest case of his life. One that didn't go back a few years or even a few decades, but one that went back 2 millennia. He took on the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and he was an atheist. Didn't believe a resurrection had actually happened. Scientifically minded, just not possible, but wanted to figure out what did happen since his wife had started to dabble a little bit in this whole Christianity thing. He didn't like this, so he set out to debunk the resurrection of Jesus. And he spent 6 months of painstaking analysis, employing everything he had mastered as a detective, things such as resisting the influence of dangerous presuppositions, the importance of abductive reasoning, respecting the nature of circumstantial evidence and the role it plays and does not play, evaluating the reliability of witnesses, examining the choice and meaning of language through forensic statement analysis, determining what's important evidentially, recognizing the rarity of true conspiracies, establishing the reliability of tracing the evidence, getting comfortable with conclusions, distinguishing between possible alternatives and reasonable alternatives, all of that and so much more. He looked at every possible alternative there was to an actual resurrection, like the disciples stole the body, or maybe the Jewish or Roman authorities stole the body, or maybe on that first Easter morning, people just got messed up and went to the wrong place, wrong tomb. Or he even dug deeper into whether or not Jesus even actually died on that cross. And at the end of his investigation, this cold case specialist reached this conclusion: Christianity is true beyond any reasonable doubt. The resurrection actually happened beyond any reasonable doubt. And today, Detective J. Warner Wallace is a deeply committed Christian. And this is what he had to say when interviewed about his new faith. Again, this is only about 30 seconds.
He knew me. He knew how committed I was to looking at evidence. And I think God reached me through that evidence. It may not be how everyone hears the gospel for the first time. But for folks like me, I needed to be reached this way. So I'm only a Christian today because it's true.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Wait a minute. Time out. Dead people don't rise. Totally get that. And you are right. You're absolutely right. They don't. We know that now, and they knew it then. But that's the point. That's what captured N.T. Wright, who taught at both Cambridge and Oxford. He has this massive 800-plus page academic work on the history surrounding the resurrection event of Jesus. He writes that no one would have ever thought up the resurrection because nobody believed such a thing was possible, first of all. Nowhere in paganism, nowhere in Judaism, nowhere in any worldview or philosophy did anybody ever conceive, posit, contemplate, or even suggest such a thing could or ever had taken place. What was his conclusion? He said the early Christians did not invent the empty tomb and the meetings or sightings of the risen Jesus in order to explain the faith they already had. They developed that faith because of what they saw, because of what they experienced, because of what they didn't think was going to happen or could happen, did happen. Okay, I've gone long and there's so much more that could be said, but I have to draw this to a close. What I want to say is this. What you do with all this information is obviously on you. But make no mistake, the Christian faith rests on this one thing. This is the basis on which you will accept or reject who Jesus is. And specifically, was Jesus who he said he was? That's the heart of it. You want to explore the Christian faith? This is where you begin, and this is where you end. This is the one question that you need to answer. You want to get at this. You have one question. Was Jesus who he said he was? That's it. And please, don't shrug that off. And I would leave you with one challenge. The one thing you cannot be in all of this, the one thing you cannot be is neutral. You can reject it. You can be in the process of careful examination of what you've just heard, and maybe you have more questions and things you need to weigh through. That's a possible position. But you can also accept it. But don't just shrug your shoulders and walk away indifferent. You can be a lot of things about Jesus, but indifferent is not one of the things you can be. Because if he was who you said he was, all bets are off. Your world just got rocked, and all of a sudden you have an eternity facing you that you have to figure out. So I challenge you to do that work. And listen, those of us here at Santa Clara Church, we're here for you. You can call us, you can email us, you can text us, you can respond to this message online one way or another. We'll get the message. We would be happy to entertain any serious and real question about this issue. Because we're all about real questions and real answers. And we want this to be a safe place for you to think these things through. So until next time, I leave that challenge with you. I'd have you think about it, study it yourself, pray about it. But don't shrug it off. Don't be neutral. Don't just toss it away and say, I can think about that another. Don't be indifferent. All right? And that's what I came to say. Thank you.